the title of this one is Compassion with Comorbidities. But as I was looking at it, really stood out to me as it's about compassionate self-care and the balance that's required when you are dealing with multiple chronic health conditions. And it's really challenging. And it's really common in this space. There are so many people who say, yes, I have migraine. It is my chronic condition. It is one of my chronic conditions, but there are many others. And sometimes for some people, migraine is always the most challenging. For other people, it's at times migraine is the most challenging, but at other times, other conditions are by far a bigger problem or issue for me. And navigating that and the different healthcare providers and taking care of yourself is really challenging, which is why we're so lucky that we have Dr. Melissa Geraghty with us today. She is a licensed clinical health psychologist. Her focus is on chronic pain, complex medical and eating disorders. She is an international workshop presenter and received recognition and awards for her advocacy efforts. She herself lives with multiple medical conditions, including chronic migraine and cluster headaches. So she very much personally connects with and understands our community. I'm thrilled because she is an inaugural board member of CHAMP. And so we are thrilled to have her as a passionate and super smart person who's helping to lead CHAMP steps into the future. So thank you, Melissa, for being with us. And
thank you, Kevin.
I am going to pull.
So thank you all for having me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about compassion of comorbidities because a lot of us, as Kevin was saying, have unfortunately a lot of experience with this. So yes, a little bit about myself before we start. Kevin gave a great introduction, and I have 5 different types of known migraine and headache diseases. I'm a little suspicious that I have a little more than that, but it gets complicated as I have a rare neural tube defect. I'm also, like Kevin was saying, hardcore migraine advocate. Not only am I a CHAMP board member now, but I co-presented the Retreat Migraine 2019 opening workshop with Jamie Sanders. I've been to Headache on the Hill twice, and I also did the Invisible Project Migraine Edition, which was the first migraine edition. And then my lovely cohort there is in the picture at the first Headache on the Hill I attended. So before we start, I just want us to kind of settle in and take a deep breath. Collectively, as a migraine community and just as a human being, we've been through a lot this year, right? And like the picture on the left shows, our brains can just kind of be on overdrive a lot. I know that staying home in the pandemic has increased migraine for some people, has taken treatments away and such, and it's just been a very, very difficult time. In March, I had COVID, and I'm still dealing with some of the side effects, which I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation later because I'm still having lasting side effects from it. So I think for all of us to just kind of settle into this, knowing that we're a bunch of badasses. We've gone through a lot this year. And I'm so honored that we're together right now. If this is your first Retreat Migraine, welcome. You are forever now a part of the migraine community. And one final note before we go on to the next slide of people with migraine whose migraines are maybe better controlled with medicine and feel like maybe they don't fit in, you are always part of our community as well. And getting a little sentimental. I miss you all. Wish we could be, together in person, but really honored and glad that we're all together right now. So what are comorbidities? Maybe you've heard about this, but there's actually quite a few definitions of it. So the first one is that we have a medical condition that exists at the same time with another condition, but they don't relate. They're just like conditions that don't have anything to do with each other, may have some overlapping symptoms as conditions do, but they're just like a bunch of conditions in one person. Another definition is to indicate a medical condition in a patient that is caused by, or is otherwise related to a condition in the same patient. Whoa, that's like a mouthful, right? So what that one means is if we have a condition such as, like with my spinal injury causes other things like my dysautonomia. So it's kind of like two conditions that they overlap because one causes the other. And then the last one is two or more medical conditions that exist simultaneously, regardless of if they relate to one another or not. So I put this pretzel here, not only because I like pretzels, but I feel like it's kind of a good way, a good analogy to describe comorbidities, because to me, comorbidities, like they get all twisty and up in there, and it's all that gooey goodness of this pretzel, but when it's a comorbidity, it's not really gooey goodness. It kind of can be a hot mess because everything overlaps and there's a bunch of salt falling off and we don't know what's causing what, and it's just very overwhelming. So this presentation is going to talk about the overwhelming emotions and everything we deal with when we have multiple diagnoses. So migraine itself has many comorbidities that tend to occur with migraine. So if you have migraine disease, you can tend to have quite a few other conditions. And here's just some of them. Of course, this list is not exhaustive. So PTSD, this can be medical PTSD, panic disorders, dissociation. And I want to stop there for a moment with dissociation, because I feel in the migraine community, this isn't talked about as much. Dissociation is quite common when people have migraine, and what dissociation is it kind of feels that we can have an outer body experience. Usually it can happen during an attack, but some people say it happens to them before they kind of know they're getting an attack and or after. So it's something that to definitely talk to your headache specialist about, because I think a lot of people go through it and it can be very scary, and they don't understand that this is something that you can absolutely have with migraine disease. Some other migraine comorbidities are anxiety disorders and depressive disorders, chronic fatigue, sleep disorders, epilepsy, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and stroke as well. So there's a gamut of all these different diagnoses that make migraine even more complex, right? So when the whole gang of comorbidities gets together, this is what it can look like. So the kids in the middle, there's anxiety, depression, loneliness, overthinking. And I gotta say, these wannabe Teletubbies kind of make me want to get some trauma counseling. It's a little bit much, right? But while I kind of laugh about this scary picture, when you're going through this, and I know because I can relate, this is very overwhelming to have all these horrific Teletubbies kind of like come at you. And sometimes they can come out of nowhere. Maybe one day your anxiety is stronger, and then the next day depression creeps up, and then overthinking. So it's not just always black and white. It doesn't always appear the same way. And a lot of us can relate to this. This is how I feel right now. The last couple of days have been kind of rough. Currently, I am seeing triple, double, I don't know. I'm seeing something, and have some nausea and stuff. Different parts of my body is creaking and popping. So my body, if it was a car, it would have everything lit, right? And a lot of us feel like this, and it is just exhausting. To have all these kind of circuits going off at once, and your body setting out all these alarms, and it's hard to know what to pay attention to, right? And then this can happen. So my anxiety thinking that everyone hates me, and then my depression telling me no one cares enough about me to hate me. Oh, right? So our diagnoses, our comorbidities can work against each other and make the chatter in our head a little louder and make things a little more difficult, because they kind of go against each other. So lucky for you guys, I'm the queen of comorbidities. I have well over, yes, I like my queen wave. I am a little British, part British, so, gotta practice it. But I have well over 20 medical conditions. Honestly, I've stopped counting. And I know many of you can relate to that. And it's a lot, right? This is how I feel. So this is, if I wrote everything down, this would be my diagnoses list, right? It's just a lot. And it's really overwhelming because, again, what diagnoses are overlapping other diagnoses? When I get a symptom, is it migraine or is it migraine plus 10 other things flaring? It's really hard to kind of figure that out. And sometimes we're not going to have the answer. But the good news is we can still figure out how to take care of ourselves. And this is how I feel. I love velociraptors. I love Jurassic Park. So when I'm trying to keep all my symptoms in check, I kind of feel like this of like, oh my gosh, this one's coming up here and this one's coming up here. Like, what do I pay attention to? And so having multiple diagnoses can make us a little twitchy, right? So like this little hamster, we're a bit stressed. And so how do we deal with this? And with all of these comorbidities comes a slew of emotions. And sometimes it's hard to suss out what we feel. It might be a little hard to see on this circle, but for example, there's anger in the middle of this. But what's under the anger? Is there, are we aggravated? Are we resentful of our medical team not properly diagnosing us? Under sadness, what's under sadness? Do we feel alone? So when we have these emotions when we're overwhelmed, it's really good that we just take the time to stop and talk about them, acknowledge them, even though it's really hard to do. Because what happens if we don't kind of stop and check in with ourselves is this stuff adds up. And if we're not trying to just lean into what's going on with us, we kind of just push it under the rug, and then after a while, poof, the rug comes flying out and everything is going every which way because we've kind of neglected on paying attention, listening to ourselves of what we need. So how do we exude compassion for our comorbidities? And this is what I really want to spend some time with for the next portion of this. So how I do this with myself and my patients is through acceptance and commitment therapy. And while this presentation, we don't have enough time to talk about it, I did do my migraine symposium for the Association of Migraine Disorders the other month on ACT and migraine. And I know that they are eventually going to post the webinars. So if you are interested in learning more about this, then absolutely it would be a great webinar for you to take a look at. But for the purposes of today, we're just going to focus on some of the main parts of ACT that I feel will be helpful for you to just take some of this today and actually do some action to take care of yourself. So acceptance. All right, a lot of misunderstandings with what acceptance is. So we're going to talk about that a little bit now. So what we're focusing on with acceptance is acceptance with resilience, not acceptance with resignation. So acceptance with resignation steals more hope than even pain can by itself. And acceptance with resignation is like, all right, this is what's happening to me. Might as well not try everything. I hope I can swear. Sorry, you guys know me. Like.
Not a problem. It's allowed.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin.
We keep it real here.
That's right. So acceptance with resignation is just like, yeah, fuck all. Like I'm done. And don't get me wrong, we all are at that point at sometimes. I do this for a living, and of course I'm going to be at that point sometimes. No one's perfect with this. But what we do aim for is acceptance with resilience, because that's what makes it possible for us to continue to live with migraine disease and in the comorbidities. So acceptance with resilience is, all right, I have this, I don't like this. But what can I do to help myself out?
And Melissa, I just want to say that I think that's so powerful there, because I've heard that before, the acceptance, and I sort of sometimes, I get my shoulders on, I'm like, don't accept it, like, keep exploring, keep pushing. But I think it's just that powerful concept, because there is, empowerment that comes with acceptance, but it has to be paired with that resilience, not the resignation that I give up.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. No, so important. And acceptance is an ongoing process. It's not going to be one and done. Just like I gave the example of, there's times where I'm beyond my coping skills and I'm not going to, help myself out, because this is rough dealing what we're dealing with. This is not something that it's just going to be like, all right, I accept everything and peaches and rainbows. That's not how it works, right? And And so acceptance definitely leads to empowerment. There's a freedom in that. And it's the act that we allow ourselves to willingly engage in our pain. And I talk about this a lot in my migraine and ACT presentation. And people are like, say what? Willingly engage in your pain? Who wants to do that? What is she, crazy? And what this means is it's the mindfulness of leaning into your pain. Because when we don't lean into our experience, whether it's a good experience, bad experience, we just kind of like dismiss ourselves. We have a whole different slew of emotions, and none of them are wrong. We don't like the strong emotions necessarily. But if, again, like I said earlier, if we don't lean into those emotions, if we don't lean into that pain, it's going to bite us later on because it just keeps building, building, building. And so that's why we do things like engage in acceptance, and it's companion mindfulness of being able to lean into this. And
Now, I'm
again,
going to interrupt
remembering.
with a quote that I came across recently that really
Oh,
stood out
yes.
to me. It was from Michael J. Fox, and it was sort of on this topic, and hearing you talk about it. And he was explaining that he had recently been in a very down place. And he said, optimism is really rooted in gratitude. Optimism is sustainable when you keep coming back to gratitude, and what follows from that is acceptance. Accepting that this thing has happened, and you accept it for what it is. It doesn't mean that you can't endeavor to change. It doesn't mean that you have to accept it as a punishment or a penance, but just put it in its proper place. Then see how much of the rest of your life you have to thrive in, and then you can move on. So I just resonated with me, and hearing your talk, it all comes together, the same way of viewing the world.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing that. I hadn't heard that quote, and that is the epiphany, you guys know what I'm trying to say. Brain fog here. That is exactly what this is about, with acceptance and just ACT in general of this. This allows us to feel empowered with such a disease that we often feel so hopeless with. And yeah, such a beautiful quote. Thank you. And so now we're going to listen to Dr. Russ Harris talk a little bit about mindfulness. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of like an overarching theme of this. And the reason why I picked this video is because there's a lot of misinformation about what mindfulness is and what it isn't. And so this is going to be like a good little overview. And I was talking to Kevin earlier. A couple of years ago, I actually did a webinar, an hour webinar on mindfulness and chronic pain. And honestly, that wasn't even enough to fully explain how mindfulness relates to chronic pain. So no worries if you're feeling a bit lost or confused after this. It's totally normal. And just have some compassion with yourself as we listen to this video.
There's an increasing number of misconceptions and misunderstandings about what it actually is. So I want to take you through the 5 most common misunderstandings about mindfulness. Now, the number one biggest myth about mindfulness is that it's meditation. That's completely false. There are zillions of ways of developing mindfulness skills, and meditation practices are just a tiny subset of the vast number of ways that we can learn to be more mindful. I can hear you breathing a sigh of relief about that. Now, the second big myth about mindfulness is that it comes from Buddhism. Now, that's false. There are actually mindfulness practices in all the world's religious traditions, going back thousands of years. There's mindfulness practices in Christianity, in Islam, in Judaism, in Taoism, in Hinduism. But the lovely thing about mindfulness is, in and of itself, it's not actually a religious practice at all. It's a mental skill set. Third on our list of mindfulness myths is that it's a type of relaxation, that when you're mindful, you're relaxed. Not the case. You can be mindful even in a really challenging, high conflict situation where you're full of anxiety or full of anger or full of sadness. You can still be mindfully engaged in the present moment, accepting of your feelings, living in the here and now. even though you're nowhere near relaxed. Number 4 on our list of mindfulness myths is that it's a way of controlling our thoughts. It's about thinking positively and getting rid of negative thoughts, and that's just not the case. In mindfulness, we become aware of our thoughts. We allow our thoughts to come and go. We kind of wisely choose which thoughts we're going to allow to guide our actions and which ones we're going to just let go. But it's not a way to control our thoughts or to think positively. And last but not least, number 5 on our list of mindfulness myths is that mindfulness is a way to feel good, to feel happy, to feel positive. It's about controlling our feelings and feeling good. And that ain't the case. Mindfulness is a way to allow the natural flow of our emotions. If we live a full life, we're going to feel the full range of feelings and emotions, the pleasant ones such as love and joy, and the painful ones such as fear and sadness and anger and anxiety. And the aim is to allow all of those emotions to flow through us without getting swept away by them. So at times when we're mindful, we will be feeling good. And at other times, we won't.
I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about essentially what Dr. Harris is saying there is mindfulness, when we engage in it, when we're in pain, is again about leaning in to the totality of ourselves, of whatever we're going through. Because if we're, say, having a migraine attack and we're also having an increase of dissociation and PTSD and depression symptoms and anxiety, if we don't lean into what we're dealing with in that moment, we can't take care of ourselves as well. We can't decide, what do I need to do? Do I need an ice pack? Do I need medicine? Do I need to go lay down? It's just about having that compassion for ourselves with that. And so this next part of ACT with comorbidities is values work. And I could talk for hours about this too. But essentially values work in ACT is when we're figuring out, how can we still stay true to ourselves, those things we care about, when we're dealing with migraine and its comorbidities. And there's quite a distinction between values and goals. A lot of people can get those confused. So values are those deep things we care about in life. And I'll give some examples in the next slide shortly. And goals are the things that we make based on our values. So for example, one of my values is education. And I had wanted to get my doctorate in clinical psychology. And so my goal based on my value of education was to get my doctorate. And once I got my doctorate, I checked that off my list because that was a goal. But values are things that we never check off. They're always things we're working towards. And there's always things that are really top in helping us feel like, yes, we have migraine disease, but yes, there's also other parts of us too. So some examples of values are family relationships, our friend relationships, our career. And that might look different for people who are on disability or have to step away from their careers due to migraine disease. Education and personal growth, fun and leisure, spirituality, community, maybe volunteering, and physical well-being. So these values are things that we deeply care about, and our values tend to not necessarily change over our lifetimes, but maybe sometimes one thing or a couple things on this list are more in our focus than others. And in our goals is to try to balance that and try to check in with ourselves when we're having, these chronic migraine attacks and such. What do we want in life? What are maybe an area that I haven't taken care of myself in a while? Have I not prayed in a while? Have I not done something fun for myself? And if I'm capable and willing, is there things I can do that allow me to work on some of those values right now. So my favorite ACT book is The Happiness Trap by Dr. Russ Harris, who we just saw in that video. And I actually will do this book over many sessions with my patients. And what's really cool about, what my patients tell me anyway is really cool, is that when we do this together, we'll read like little sections out loud together, and then we totally go on tangents about how it impacts their life, what we're talking about in the book. We do lots of experiential activities that are in the book. I bring some in that aren't in the book. It's just really awesome if you can do that. And if you don't have a therapist, you can do this with people in your migraine tribe, people in your household who are willing. Like, honestly, it's just a really great book. Even though the book is not about pain, it doesn't matter. It explores your values and mindfulness and coping skills. Like, it's just really great way to start if you're wanting to know how to incorporate ACT in your life. And then comes the inevitable pain flare when we have comorbidities, right? And it's always creeping. We don't know when it's going to happen. This picture was taken of me. I remember I showed this one to my doctor, and he was like, "It doesn't even look like you." It's hard to tell, but my eyes are kind of just, one's like bigger than the other. I think I had a severe migraine attack for over a week in this photo, and had to, cancel patients, sit on my couch. It's what needed to be done, just felt miserable and guilty, and all the emotions that come up with having comorbidities. And this is what's happening to me today. 50 shades of brain fog, but also, of course, can get worse for us when we're having a migraine attack, even though brain fog typically is most of the time. For a lot of us, hangs out all the time. But for me anyway, it can get worse. So I kind of like laughed at this meme of, "Yay, you have the spoons to cook a healthy dinner. Oh, you forgot to set the timer and things are really heating up, and then the smoke alarm goes off, so that's going to really help the migraine." And then your neighbor who hates you calls 911, and at least your dinner isn't undercooked. So isn't this like that? We try to do something to take care of ourselves, and then it blows up in our face. And then that's where we can get the case of the fuckets of, why bother doing this mindfulness? Why bother doing coping skills? I'm over this. I can't believe this, happened to me again. I'm trying, and every time I try, things like this happen. And so again, it's really trying for us to show compassion to ourselves that our brains do work differently when we're having these migraine attacks, and how can we care for ourselves? So self-care in a flare. Be in the moment, lean in, accept that you're having a flare. Sounds like basic, right? But not easy to do when you're having a flare. A lot of people feel like, maybe I can just ignore it a little longer and it will go away, and then maybe symptoms get worse. It is about having to lean into that moment and ask yourself, what can I do? What can I do right now? Determine if you can tell which conditions or symptoms are in a flare. Sometimes we're not going to be able to tell what condition is flaring, and that's okay. We can still help ourselves out, but sometimes it can, if you have POTS, sometimes that is, and it's like POTS flaring, well, then you can do something about it. Maybe you need to have some salt water, something like that. So that can be helpful. But even if you don't know what conditions are flaring, it's okay. Try to do a baseline of, all right, well, maybe I know typically when conditions are flaring, I need to be in a quiet room in the dark with an ice pack. And so trying to take care of yourself that way. So pace if needed. This is really hard for me because a lot of times, and again, I do this for a living, and so this isn't going to be perfect. Pacing is rough because I feel like if I truly paced in the way I would need, I would never get anything done. And I know a lot of people feel that way. And so sometimes it will look like I don't really pace, I do a bunch of stuff, and then I crash really, really hard. And then it's like a repeat, and you can get stuck in this cycle. But it's a really good thing to kind of learn what our pacing needs are and what that looks like. And rest if needed. That's another thing that we feel really guilty about. If I rest now, people in my household are going to think I'm lazy, I'm not contributing, those sort of things. But rest is also crucial. What I have to do for myself is I tend to work afternoons and nights. That's when I see patients. And so pretty much I'm a potato before that on the couch. Like I can't do much. I can't really function. I'm sitting and resting And it might look like a whole bunch of nothing to other people, but that's what I have to do in order to live my value of helping other people. And so that's how I incorporate rest. In a self-care, reach out to support. We know, a lot of you, if you're new to the migraine community, now there's a whole bunch of migraine community online. Reach out and remind yourself that flares pass and emotions come and go. And that is super hard in the moment. But physiologically, our bodies can't hold certain emotions or certain pain levels for so long, even though it feels like it. What happens is there might even be slight, minute shifts and changes. Like if we're having depression, it maybe ebbs and flows a little bit. And so there's something that can be really comforting about reminding yourself in the moment of this is gonna pass and it's gonna come and go. I got this. I've done this before. And then, of course, use your coping skills, such as grounding, deep breathing, mindfulness. So, grounding could be if you're feeling overwhelmed in the moment with senses, simply counting 5 things, counting 5 smells, counting 5 colors, those sort of things to bring you to the moment.
Before we go on from this slide,
Yes.
I love this one because there's 6 different things on here, and certainly for some people, some will work better than others. So it's nice to see the full toolkit. But I also know when you're in a flare, it's hard to think clearly. The brain fog, as you just had. Do you find that it's best for people to have it like a preemptive plan? Like, it's one thing. Like if all else fails, I know what my one go-to is. Or it's, it's an A or a B. So, because I could just imagine in the midst of a flare, I got to choose amongst these 6 options. I've seen it with Katie. I present her 6 options at that point. We're never going to get to a solution.
Totally.
But if she knows just one thing she's got to do, just do that one thing, she can do that. And if that's the one thing that is going to get her through or to help her to feel better, that's where to focus the energy. So what would you say people should think through to prepare so they're ready in that moment?
Yes, perfect point. And thank you so much for bringing that up. So with my patients, everyone has a coping skills binder, and we put the skills in there that work for them. Because again, everything's not going to work for the person, or for every person. Everyone's different. And so we'll have like top coping skills because we're very smart people. But when we're in a flare, our brains kind of shut down. So my patients are able then to open up their binder and don't have to think about it. And they can just point to one of their top 5 and do those skills. And then, of course, because we're not going to be taking our binders everywhere all the time, a lot of my patients will also put these skills, take pictures in their phone too. And so for me, what I say and what I recommend to all my patients and what I use for myself is, if anything, top skill is breathing, slowing down your breathing. Because oftentimes if we physiologically slow down ourselves and our breathing, our minds can slow down. And then maybe on our own, we can think of other coping skills that would benefit in the moment when we're overwhelmed. When you add pain on top of it, that is super duper hard. So then that's when I say trying to just focus on your breathing, count your breathing, like breathing in, hold your breath, 1, 2, breathing out, hold your breath, 1, 2. So anything with the breath is kind of like my go-to and a lot of my patients' go-to. So thank you for asking that. Yeah. And so during a migraine attack, I thought this was important. And again, I don't know if this is very clear. So Kevin, you'll have to tell me, because this has just been like a whole bunch of weeks of a lot of fog for me. But if we spend a migraine attack trying to determine what we did to cause our attack, several things occur. We blame ourselves for having a neurological disease. We don't have control over this. And if we're in our attack and go, oh my gosh, it must have been that one thing I did. I can't believe I'm so stupid to do that one thing again, and I'm causing this, and look, well, then what happens? Your migraine attack symptoms are just going to get worse, right? And then we blame ourselves for that. So it really takes away from taking care of ourselves if during the migraine attack, we're like, what did I do now? And of course, we know that there's no guarantee that we can't avoid future attacks. Over controlling our lives can make our lives become smaller and smaller. And therefore, trying to rack our brains in the moment of an attack doesn't help us. And I'm not talking about triggers. Knowing our triggers is a very important part of living with migraine. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about that blame of, what did I do again? A lot of us, just going out to the store or visiting a friend will cause a migraine attack. Does that mean we shouldn't do it? No, because again, our worlds can get smaller and smaller, but there is a bunch of ways we can do this to show self-care to ourselves, such as having an out, wearing migraine, glasses, these sort of things to help ourselves out. So I hope that
And
makes
it's
sense.
just not, yeah, and it does make sense, and it's not productive, and it's so natural from the self side or from the care
Yes.
partner side. I
Yep.
find myself, and I've spoken before in this conference, I think triggers are overemphasized and blah, blah, blah. But yet, I find myself, you just sort of lean to, you get drawn to, Katie has an attack. Oh, well, if you hadn't stayed up late last night, if it hadn't been
Right.
this, instead of saying what I know so deeply to be true, this is an unpredictable neurological disease.
Exactly.
You could have done none of those things that I'm now suggesting, and you might have still had this attack. Yes, we do know that, there are certain things you can do that increase your odds of avoiding or
Yes.
unfortunately stack up and increase your odds of getting an attack, but it's still unpredictable and it's not productive in that very moment. Maybe down the road when you're not in the midst of
Exactly.
pain as an individual or a care partner who should be focusing on the care and support in that moment. At another moment, you could sort of say, hey,
Yes.
what are the things I could think about, do more or less of these things? But in that moment, it's not about self-blaming. It's not about trying to point out to the person you're caring for, well, you probably wouldn't be here right now if you hadn't done X, Y, or Z. Just deal with that current moment.
Exactly.
Set that self-criticism or set that observation aside for another time. I know better. I don't always, do it better, but I'm so glad you have this slide to emphasize it because it is important.
And thank you so much for sharing that as a caregiver perspective as well. And I blame myself too, like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And then you realize when you're blaming yourself and you try to have that compassion, just as when you realize when you maybe were saying to Katie, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't have stayed up that late. And then you stop yourselves, and this is a neurological disease. We can help it. We can do everything perfectly and still get migraine attacks. So to me, doing things that I know may cause an attack is worth it for me, because I want to live my life and do those things I care about. Is that always possible? No, but I try to do my best, right? And a reminder, I love this, and I don't know who wrote it. When I am resting because my body is weak, I need to remember that I am not wasting the day doing nothing. I am doing exactly what I need to do. I'm recovering. What a compassionate way to look at rest, right? I am recovering. I am taking care of myself, my body and my mind, all of that. So I thought that this was a beautiful thing to add. And so compassion with doctor's visits. Oof, some of us may feel a little bit twitchy reading that, right? So self-compassion in action at the doctor's office. So here's our plight, right? We say too much. We're assumed to be over-exaggerating. We don't say enough. We won't get properly helped. So there's this book called Needless Suffering, How Society Fails Those with Chronic Pain. And it talks about how people who maximize their pain experiences need to be confronted and taught that their behaviors are counterproductive, though in an encouraging way. I don't like the word confronted, but that's just maybe because I feel like it's a bit too forceful. And that's not what the author is meaning here at all. What he's meaning is to try to have try to practice a balance of how do you go into the doctor's office and you can be assertive, but not angry and pointing out, or not angry and like, oh, all these doctors do the same thing to me, and you're just going to do it too, versus here's my diagnoses, here's what's going on. It's just it takes a practice, it takes balance, and we could do a whole bunch of webinars on just how to assert yourself with your doctors. I know earlier in Retreat Migraine, there were some amazing role plays that talked about this stuff. And it will be future conversations as well that we all can practice. How do we balance saying too much and not saying enough, because then the counter aspect of this is people who minimize their pain experiences aren't going to get proper help either. And it just is really frustrating to feel like we have this extra stress. We're already vulnerable. We're going into doctor's offices, and then we're feeling like, oh my gosh, now I need to like figure out how to come across that I can get helped. One way that I do this for my sanity is I created a medical history and current medications binder. And you can actually find an article I wrote about this on the Invisible Project website. You can just type in like my last name and I'll pop up. And my Invisible story will too. But what I did is, it's an ongoing document I have saved on my computer with my gazillion diagnoses and all the medications I've tried, the 60 migraine medications I've tried, when I stopped, why they didn't work, blah, blah, blah. And so when I'm getting ready for a new doctor, it's not as stressful for me because I just will print out an updated version of this and bring it to the doctor. They put it on their records, and then I can go through it with them so that when brain fog attacks, I don't forget the questions I had wanted to ask because it's all right here. So this is something that really helps me out to advocate for myself. And then I always tell people, make it fun. If you have to have this giant list of diagnoses and all this stuff, I have a zebra and peacock binder because that's just how I roll. So, and advocacy. Yes, that's what CHAMP is all about, right? It's empowerment. I know a lot of headache specialists now write scripts for advocacy, and I can't describe the feeling it is to go to Headache on the Hill and be with our tribe at Retreat Migraine and just feel that empowerment resonate. It's just a beautiful thing. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. So why advocacy? It's empowering to use our voice, to feel like we're heard, and to find our tribe and our support system of patients who have the same diagnosis as us. That's important so that we feel heard. And when we have quote unquote weird stuff that happens to us, it's such a relief to hear someone else go, me too. Oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one, right? And advocacy work can give people a direction and a purpose. And our voices and continued advocacy work honors those who are no longer with us, people who have died from migraine, committed suicide from migraine, and everyone who knows Becky and her Melissa and Billy. This anchor is for them, right? And it allows us to just feel like we're truly helping on lots of levels. And if you don't know where to start, you can follow migraine advocates on social media and absolutely go to CHAMP. There's so many resources for you to be able to figure out where to start and get involved at your own pace. What I love about this community is there's no like, you have to do this, this, and this. And oh, well, if you have a flare, like there's lots of room, flex room, because people truly understand of maybe we said we could do something and then plans change because we have an attack and we can't do it. And that's fine. So it's such a great community for that.
Yeah, thank you for acknowledging CHAM and signing up for our email list. You'll get those notifications. Also, tomorrow, I believe it's our last session of the entire Retreat Migraine Conference. Our presentations from, I think it's 8 different CHAMP member organizations that are going to present various advocacy programs and opportunities. And just a real short, so like, this is what this thing is, this is what you get for being a part of it, and these are the types of things we ask you to do. So that will be a really, great awesome overview of all these opportunities. And, our session after this is going to be another great way that people can share their stories through local media.
Absolutely.
So we're all about using this advocacy connector.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes. And it's just beautiful, again, to have that connection with other people that deal with what you deal with.
There was one question that really stood out from the group, not to dwell on it, but just asking about making their own notebooks that you mentioned. Have you written on that or spoken about it before that you could point people to where that is?
Yes. So if you go to the Invisible Project website and type in my last name, it will, like, my Invisible Project will pop up, but I also wrote a full article that goes through every single section that I personally have in my notebook notebook and why it's helpful. And people can always reach out to me. In the next slide is like my contact information. But yeah, so go to Invisible Project and a whole article is on there.
And is that the notebook that has both your medications, your diagnoses,
yes,
as well as the coping skills and those
everything?
types of things?
Oh no, not the coping skills. I'm sorry.
Okay,
the coping skills
is where they were definitely interested. The binder of coping skills that you mentioned your patients
I see.
having.
Okay. Yeah, the coping skills, I don't have an article about that one. That is something that based on my patients, I through many, many months, we create that together. So unfortunately, I don't have like a set copy of like, this is what I do because it's customized for each patient. But typically I'll have like some different aspects such as mindfulness, values and goals work, family communications, advocacy. We'll have different tabs in it. And actually most of the coping skills that I talk about with my patients are in that book, The Happiness Trap, that was on one of my slides. Many of the coping skills are right there in that book. And then the ones you like, you can create your own binder of it.
Okay, love that. And I'll just sort of speak for the group that if you're looking for inspiration or more work to take on, I think creating a whole series of educational courses, how to make your own notebook and a variety of different platforms could hit. Write your own book, whatever it is. I think a lot of people could take a lot from that.
We'll talk about that later on the champ side. I'd be willing.
Perfect. Are you going to be in this chat session, the virtual lobby later today?
I can.
By chance?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So you can be in there to chat, and we'll talk more about potentially a project around this for CHAMP.
Thank you, everyone.
Our next session is no, thank you so much. So two things I want to say. Hey, some people love keeping it real, and I certainly said, feel free to let those expletives fly. And I know that really resonates with some people, but they don't resonate with everyone. So for anyone who was watching who has a different view on cursing, we apologize, didn't mean to offend you.
Yes.
We hope you still got a lot out of this content. And then for the next session is with the U.S. Pain Foundation focusing on local media, and it will be really helpful if you have a pen and a piece of paper for you, because it's very much a workshop, and having pen and paper will be helpful. So with that, remember to take the quiz. Thank you, Dr. G. And click back over to the agenda and join us for the next session with the U.S. Pain Foundation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Our coalition is working together to solve the challenge of migraine and headache diseases and support patients wherever they are on their patient journey. None of this would have been possible without the generous support of our sponsors, who helped us bring Retreat Migraine to life digitally this year and support hope, community, and advocacy at such an important time.